Good afternoon, almost good evening, and welcome to another edition of our Rugby World Cup special shows. With you today is Gregor Townsend has named his team about less than an hour ago for Scotland's third game against Romania, and there's been quite a lot of changes, almost wholesale changes, 13 in total ahead of playing Romania on Saturday evening. I'm joined by Stuart Bathgate to talk over those changes and plenty of other things that are happening in Scottish rugby this week. Stuart, what are your initial reaction to the team news?
I think it's a very sensible team. It's also a team that most people would expect more or less. You can never, it's pretty hard to predict any Gregor Townsend selection with 100% accuracy. But in this case, it seemed pretty obvious there were players there who hadn't played at the World Cup. They're there for a reason. Any member of that squad is capable of playing his part in beating Romania. So it's a very sensible, almost safety first selection, really.
Yeah, when you say safety first, Stuart, I presume you mean avoiding injuries being that safety?
Yeah, safety first is a combination of making sure the likes of Finn Russell doesn't get injured in a game that Scotland should win with something to spare. And also, just making sure that your first choice team in general isn't too overdone, basically. I mean, you could play your first choice team if you wanted, and they could all maybe get through Saturday's game. But the more players play week after week, the more susceptible they are to injury in big games, and you don't want that to happen either. So it's sensible.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't sure if there'd be as many changes, because I think it's so important that obviously Scotland get the bonus point, which, look, no disrespect to Romania, but, Scotland should easily still get that bonus point with the team it's out playing. But, the point differential, it could come into it, it might not come into it, it could come into it. So there was that factor as well. But, your key players, you want to bat them and call it the rule ahead of that Ireland game. It's no surprise to see, Finn Russell, obviously Scotland's talisman, not only not in the starting team, but, not in the squad.
Yeah. I mean, Ben Healy has only got a couple of caps, but can't remember which match it was, his first game at Murrayfield in the summer. He slotted entirely into the Finn Russell way of running things, which is what you want from your backup 10. You want someone he can't be identical to Finn, obviously, but who can understand the game plan and make sure the team are taking over in just about the same way. So I'm really glad, actually, that Ben Healy is in there. I think he deserves the chance. I think this is the kind of game that he can take charge of pretty successfully. In other words, there was no reason to select Finn and quite a few reasons not to select him.
Yeah, of course. I mean, what's your predictions of this game against Romania? They conceded 82 points to Ireland, obviously scored 8 in that game, and against South Africa it was 76. The Springboks racked up and obviously didn't concede any points at all. I mean, is that a case of Scotland going out and winning, but also winning, really well and putting on a good display?
It's a case of winning first. The cliche, and it's funny how the cliche in rugby is always a cricket one, but coaches talk about building your innings first. And you can't go out to score 100 straight off. You've got to decide, maybe start with a penalty. If you're offered a straightforward kick, take it. Don't go for the corner necessarily straight away. Remind the Romanians that they're not meant to win this match. They're not meant to compete. And if you go 3-6-9 and then score the odd try, that's fine. Yeah, obviously they'll need the bonus point, or they'll definitely want one. But they got it by, 32 minutes against Tonga, or just before half-time? And Tonga are a lot stronger than Romania. Romania don't have a few former All Blacks on their squad. Yeah. They don't have anyone who's quite so robust at all. So, yeah, you don't go hell for leather. Just steadily crank up the pressure, and it will tell.
Yeah, also the two players that keep their place from the win over Tonga are Kyle Steyn and Charlie Harris. So, I mean, Steyn looked good, I thought, against Tonga. Obviously, Darcy Graham came on and scored, I think it was the try of the game by some distance. But it shows the strength and depth that Scotland do have in the backs, especially that wing position. Obviously, you've got three, I think, top-class winners there.
Yeah, I think Darcy Graham and Euan van der Merwe are both ahead of Kyle Steyn because of their attacking prowess, really. Steyn is by far the best defender of the three, though. And that's the reason he was brought in against Tonga. I mean, Duhan is probably the biggest, most physical, most powerful of the three. certainly both Duhan and Kyle Steyn are bigger and stronger, tougher than Darcy. Actually, I better not say tougher because he'd say he is quite tough. You know what I mean? But Kyle Steyn's defensive awareness and his tackling ability are far superior to Duhan's. Duhan gets caught out a lot, out of position. He'll go too far inside. He'll leave space out wide. Kyle Steyn is much more intelligent than that. So, as a good defensive organiser and as someone who can attack pretty well too, Steyn, he's there for a couple of reasons. Chris Harris the same. Chris Harris over the past few seasons has been really the defensive linchpin until the Sione Topulotu and Hugh Jones combination took over. Harris was there to organise the defence. Everything looks in from his position at 13. And without him, sometimes Scotland look a wee bit adrift. So again, he's there, like Kyle Steyn, to be sensible, no nonsense, get the job done, and do it really with ruthless efficiency, no messing about.
Yeah, no, completely. I wonder if Steyn's defensive superiority to the other two, maybe gives Townsend a slight. I know we're looking, 2 weeks ahead rather than looking ahead to the Romania game, but the Ireland game, do you think Steyn obviously wasn't even involved in the squad for the South Africa game? I think in hindsight that might be viewed as a potential mistake by some, but I mean, you expect Steyn to be at least on the bench for the Ireland game. I suppose he could come into contention to play due to his defensive skills.
I don't expect him to be at least on the bench, no. I'm not saying I expect him not to be in the 23, but it depends entirely. I mean, there's so many different levels of permutations that come into play, really. One of which is the state of the opposition. Have they got injury worries? Who are they likely to play? There's a case for playing Kyle Steyn ahead of Darcy Graham, but it was a case that, as you say, Gregor Townsend didn't accept against South Africa. So I'm not sure why you do it against Ireland, really. Kyle Steyn will keep things tighter, but do you want to have a tight game against Ireland? I think probably not. I think you want to expand it. I think the key to beating South Africa and Ireland, if Scotland never get around to doing it, is to stretch them, to not have an arm wrestle. I should expect from the top two teams in the world, they're really physical, they're really strong. They will try and basically asphyxiate you, strangle you to death, however you want to put it. And maybe the best way of doing that is, rather than looking for the sort of solidity that Kyle Steyn will bring, getting someone like Darcy Graham, who, like South Africa's Cheslin Colby, can do something crazy. Not the biggest guy in the world, but can create a bit of magic out of nothing. And perhaps a bit of magic rather than a bit of systematic play is what we will need to beat Ireland.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was just looking for a point to debate there. Just in general, I mean, I've seen a little bit of criticism of the World Cup generally due to the format. Having quite large gaps between games. Some teams having, the kind of fortnight between two games as Scotland had between South Africa and then Tonga. What do you make of it? Do you think that's like a legitimate concern over the kind of structuring of the tournament as opposed to the actual, quality on the field?
I think the quality has been really good. Yeah. I think the concern works two ways. One, it seems weird to all of us that Scotland play one World Cup game and then we don't see them for 2 weeks. They just disappear. Is that good for Scotland? Is it good for the tournament? I don't think so. On the other hand, you saw Namibia yesterday. They lost to Uruguay in the end. You could see they were really running out of patience, discipline, everything. They were playing 4 games in something like 18 days. So that's not great either. The problem is the number of teams in rugby. We've got 4 pools of 5 teams, so 20 teams. And if you have a 5-team pool, you're always going to have one team sitting out a week or a match day round, whatever you want to call it. The only alternative is to have more teams or fewer teams. You wouldn't want to go down to 16 because that would be pretty tight. But seriously, if you look at the level of international rugby just now, there are not 24, 28, 32 teams like you've got in football's World Cup to compete at this level. I think it's okay having a few minnows like Portugal and Chile and Namibia. Have too many, you're just getting people traveling the world to get a kicking for no real reason, basically.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Just looking ahead to some of the other games this weekend. I mean, Denny games in particular, your catch your eye. It's probably not the glamour games that there was obviously last weekend when there was Ireland, South Africa on Saturday night. Obviously Scotland played Sunday, and there was a Wales Australia game to kind of round off the weekend. There's no such glamour ties this weekend, but I mean, New Zealand, Italy, that could be quite good. Any other games stand out for you?
No, I think you're right. It's a quiet week. I'm planning to go to Edinburgh tomorrow night, and Scotland women have got a friendly against Spain on Saturday. Well, Glasgow are also playing against Zebra on Saturday. So domestically, there's a bit more going on. And given that I'm based at home, I'll probably watch these games, actually. No, last weekend we were spoilt for choice. I ended up feeling I probably spent too much time sitting around watching rugby. But this weekend, I think there's a few games that are quite easy to miss, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I'm in complete agreement. Let's talk about the domestic game. That's obviously close to coming back. We'll touch on the women first, right, and then we'll go and talk about Glasgow and Edinburgh. But you looking forward to that game at the weekend? Are you going to head to it, Stuart?
I'll be going to it, but to be honest, Scotland women, Edinburgh and Glasgow, they're all friendlies, and you can't read too much into it. In a game of rugby, nobody's going to be half-hearted while they're going for tackles or that, but it's just one of these things. You just got to see how individual players are looking. I mean, Scotland are preparing for the WXV tournament, which is in South Africa next month. They've got 3 games there. So anything they do against Spain on Saturday is really just building up, preparing for that, seeing how they get on, having a run out together as a team. And hopefully whatever goes wrong on Saturday, hopefully there's not going to be much, but whatever does go wrong, you'd rather it goes wrong then than in the actual thing. So, no, I mean, it should be an interesting game, but it's not going to be vital, to be honest.
Yeah, no, not at all. The women's game is at the Hive Stadium, isn't it? So, people to get along and watch. And then Glasgow and Edinburgh in friendly action. Edinburgh play Connacht, and then Glasgow plays Zebra. I suppose these games give players on the kind of periphery an opportunity, or certainly younger players, to put up their hand and impress while so many players are obviously away at the World Cup.
Yeah, they do. I mean, for example, Edinburgh, I've got 25 players out, 15 at the World Cup, I think 13 Scots, Boffelli with Argentina and Bill Mata with Fiji. They've got 9 players injured. That's senior players, not kids who might have played. And then Ben Vellacott, who's just announced as captain this week, is about to start his paternity leave because his partner went into labour yesterday. So 25, that's more than a whole matchday squad. So you're right. There'll be a lot of interesting young players for the coaches to take notes on. But whether we'll learn too much about how Edinburgh are going to perform in the coming season, I'm not sure. Glasgow, just about as badly off. I think, what did they do? Was it 11 or 12 players they announced were injured? And obviously they've got the bulk of the world. They've got more players in the World Cup squad than Edinburgh, than anyone else. So they're pretty stretched as well. Though I would expect them to beat Zebra. I think Connacht might be a bit tougher for Edinburgh.
Yeah, probably results aren't the most important thing, though, are they? In these kind of friendly, they obviously are important, results always, but it's more about how these players do. What do you think generally the expectations or the targets will be for Glasgow and Edinburgh next season?
The target for Glasgow will be to build on a really promising first season under Franco Smith. Nobody was hugely enthused when he took over as head coach a year ago, but he sorted things out. They reached the Challenge Cup final, they reached the playoffs. And you could argue that top 8 in the URC is a minimum requirement, but they did it. And quite often, new coaches take a while in whatever sport to get things right, but he didn't take very long at all. So building on that, becoming a wee bit more consistent. Well, Glasgow had a really good season last time round. Edinburgh were poor, and then Mike Blair, who was head coach, decided he'd had enough by February, really. So the priority for Edinburgh will be to be more solid, to win a few games that they should win, as opposed to losing them narrowly, which is what happened last season. Yeah,
no, completely. So just going back to Scotland, I mean, do you think they'll get that and the emphatic result that they need? Obviously, it's all going to come down to this. There's no point avoiding it. It's going to be a really difficult challenge to qualify by beating Ireland and then what Scotland will need to do in that game. But I mean, they can't let their minds wander too far ahead. They've got to take care of business against Romania on Saturday. But I mean, I presume you think they'll do it and rack up a pretty decent score while doing so.
Yeah, I think something like 64-0. So I mean, I wouldn't put too much money on that precise score, obviously. In fact, I predicted the precise score for every game in the pool stages, and I've not got one yet. So anybody listening, don't spend your money on a 64-0 win. But there's so many different factors, such as, will Romania be completely demoralised by 50 minutes, or will they somehow find the fighting spirit to make a real game of it for 80? Will Scotland narrowly fail to score a few tries, like we've seen Fiji do in that game against Wales, for example? They had 3 or 4 that went missing. That's 20 points or more on the board. Or will Scotland be really accurate? And again, it depends on the conditions. We think, is it going to be raining in France? It's been sunny most of the time. But obviously, rainy conditions tend to lessen the scoring game. So it is hard to predict accurately. But I would say 7 or 8 tries for Scotland.
Yeah, 7 last weekend. So it'd be good to get go one better and rack up 8 this weekend. Like we said, it's not the best weekend of rugby compared to, of course, last weekend, but still for Scotland it's good. And just lastly, I want to touch on this. We talked about the 2-week breaks between games, and that's what Ireland will have between that and playing Scotland. So from playing South Africa and then to Scotland. I mean, do you read anything to that? Is that good for them getting that length for rest, or would you rather have the kind of game to kind of get up to their fit, just kind of get that game in?
Probably neither. I think teams are so used to it now. If you look at the Six Nations, quite often, what have we got? 2 fallow weekends where everybody gets a 2-week rest. And at club level, 2 teams are used to it. It's not like suddenly they'll go AWOL for a week, 10 days, go skiing or something like that. These guys know how to look after their downtime. Sometimes having a few days away back home, for example, I think a lot of the countries in that situation have told their players, you want to go home for 3 days? Fine, as long as you're back on Thursday. They all know how, as individuals, how to handle themselves best. So it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. I think we've got to remember that, given the number of changes in the Scotland team, the vast majority of our players who take the field against Ireland will also have had 2 weeks off.
Very true. Stuart, thanks for your time this afternoon. We'll be back with a video live from Lille on Saturday evening, and we'll round up the action and react to it on Sunday. Hopefully we're celebrating a very high-scoring win for Scotland. Stuart, I'll speak to you next week ahead of the Ireland game. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.